aviation community is amazing. We have the best jobs in the world, and the community is one where we're for each other. They're stellar. And, the aviation community is just that really unique world. It's sort of a secret. We all know. And so that's the cool thing about what we get to do.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. We're not just about dreams. We're about making them take flight. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Fly the Transition. It has been a while, but we're going to get back into telling some stories that explore aviation career transformation. Well, I'm your host, Jim. Welcome back, everyone, to Fly the Transition. It has been like a month and a half since I put out an episode, so sincere apologies. I've been dealing with some health stuff and work stuff, so just been insanely busy and or under the weather. So although I've done a couple of interviews, I just haven't had time to do the edits to put out new episodes of Fly the Transition. But that all ends today. I hope to get back on track and start regularly putting out episodes of Fly the Transition once again. So thanks for sticking with me, for those of you who have been waiting for a new episode. While that's been going on, I think I probably alluded to this in the last episode, but the plane is down for an engine overhaul, so it is going to be out of service for quite a while, so not a lot of flying being done on my part. Well, no flying being done on my part. In addition to all the other stuff that's been going on, just haven't had time to get up into the air. But spring has sprung. I'm back in with the flying club that I was in when I first started flying all those years ago, and I hope to get back in the air soon. In another update of what I've got going on, the YouTube channel Aero Exploration that I've started has been a lot of fun to put that stuff together, doing research on various events of aviation history and doing these weekly recaps of those events. So not only does it satisfy a bit of that creative side of me, but it also has been really fun to just dig into these different events in aviation history and just learn about some of the great things that has happened over the years to make aviation such a great thing. If you haven't checked out that channel, it's just Aero Exploration if you search that on YouTube, and I'll have a link down in the show description for this episode as well. The final note of kind of creative outlet stuff, I'm redoing the website for all of these programs, Fly the Transition, Flying Midwest, and Aero Exploration, etc., etc., also including my good friend, the Badger Pilot, on that channel over at flyingmidwest.com. Hoping to have that all updated and a little bit of a cleaner look over the next few weeks or months or so. And when we do that, I will relaunch the website and we will get some new merch out there as well. So if you're looking for some Fly the Transition merchandise, that will be available. But enough about me. This episode is going to be all about Andy Sharp, who is a Part 135 pilot currently. He's flying charter operations all over the globe, and he's got quite the history. He grew up with aviation from a very, very early age and took a different path into some software engineering, all while he was still maintaining just his casual flying, up until the point where he decided to make it a career for himself. And that's what this episode will be all about. So without further ado, welcome Andy to the Fly the Transition podcast. Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Fly the Transition. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you tonight. We've been talking a little bit before we hit the record button, and I think we're going to have a good time tonight. So thank you so much. I'm glad.
Well, thanks for having me, and I've listened to your episodes, and, I hope you don't have to throw this one in the trash.
I highly doubt that. Based on how we've talked so far, this is going to be fun. So,
no, it will be.
As we dive into this, tell me about how you're first exposed to aviation.
When I was a kid, okay, it just sounds like I'm making stuff up. Half the stuff I'm going to say, I promise you I'm going to try to be as accurate as possible. I have this problem of I really want to be accurate. But I thought every kid had airplanes. Look, I grew up when I was 4 years old. We moved to a farm in Mississippi, and my dad had an airplane. He was a pilot. We had tractors, we had, bulldozers, and I thought that's how every kid grew up. And so my dad somehow loved old airplanes. We never had anything new. It was we couldn't probably afford it, but he had an old crop duster. We crop dusted the farm with the steerman. Okay. He had an old Cessna, I remember 140. At one time he had a 170, a polished 170. He used to make me polish the Cessna 170. He had a Fairchild 24 when I was probably 10 or 12. And then somehow he got, we had at the same time before the economy went south in the late 70s, early 80s, we had a Super Cub, and we had a 57 Super Cub, and we had a Cessna 195. And that, the radial, all metal, amazing airplane that's Cessna. And I flew that Super Cub like crazy. And as a kid, I was exposed to aviation, and I just thought it was normal, which I now look back and go, holy cow, every kid should grow up like that, thinking that. And so, but, I realized my friends, they tell stories, and, one time I was, we lived so far away from town in the middle of the Delta of Mississippi, and on this farm, and I was playing Little League, I can remember, and I was probably crying, and I was complaining that we were going to be late to practice, and it was a big deal. It was like one of our first practices, and Dad kind of he was tired of me belly aching, so he said, "Come here," and he jumped in the airplane. We jumped in the airplane. Get your glove, and he landed on a turn row next. He landed in a cotton field turn row next to the field, and I jump out. He goes, "Get out," and I jump out. And I run across this cotton field, and you should have seen the coach and the players were all looking like, who is this kid running across the field? I had my glove in my hand. And so that's how my dad was kind of crazy guy, eclectic. He was a mechanical engineer, and one of his first jobs was for Chrysler, and they contract NASA. Chrysler was one of NASA's largest contractors. And so my dad worked at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville at Redstone Arsenal, and that's where I was born. Okay. And so he was a designer and just, loved aviation and so anyway, and kind of crazy and let me fly and do things that, I would never let my own kids do. My current and only wife, we've been married 36 years, and our first date, I picked her up in an airplane, and believe it or not, her dad let her go with this 17-year-old kid in an airplane.
Brings an airplane. Oh, geez.
But that's how I was exposed. Early on, okay. My dad was a pilot and a crop duster, and he loved learning. He was a really smart guy, to work for NASA, but he liked learning, and he died in 2017. We were just best friends and partners in crime when it came to aviation, and I could ask him any question and he would know the answer. Well, he just kept getting ratings, and at one time, I think in 73, he was only one of 3 people who had a multi-engine seaplane rating in Mississippi. And so that's how I grew up. Ended up crop dusting a little bit as a young man. Went to college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I certainly didn't think, I probably thought out there maybe I could fly professionally, but I knew that I wanted to get some sort of technical degree for a backup. So I got a mechanical engineering degree. Mechanical aerospace was a big, nice degree at Mississippi State, and I took a bunch of extra courses in composite. This new class called composite materials, where we were laying up carbon fiber and Kevlar.
Uh-huh.
And a little side note, while I was in Raspet Flight Center at Mississippi State in the early mid 80s, there were these guys from Japan in a lab next door to us, and they kept our teacher said, "You can't go in there. Don't cross that border." But we would see these guys, and they were all driving Honda Accords, and that was the beginning of the Honda flight program.
Oh, wow.
And they were designing stuff back in the mid 80s. And I got to see that. They just said, we're not, one of my professors said, it's Honda. They're doing something, but we're not supposed to say anything about it. And so here we are, now there's a Honda jet.
Yeah, there sure is. Yeah. So back in your youth, you talk about how at 17, you're picking people up, or you're picking your wife up for a date in an airplane. I take it that at an early age, then you started to probably go after some certificates.
Yeah, my dad. So one of my earliest memory, somebody says, "Do you remember the first time you ever flew an airplane?" I say, "I do." And all these stories sound crazy, but I can remember at the age of 5, it was one of my earlier memories. My dad was I think he was getting maybe a multi-commercial rating, and so he was building time. Okay. And he took me up with him in a Grumman AA-1A, and he had the bubble canopy. I remember what color it was. And he let me take the control wheel, and this is really kind of funny, but he kept saying, no, you can't. He taught me what the altimeter did and what the VSI did, the vertical. And he taught me kind of, if you look at that little VSI and keep the wings level and the altitude, you want to keep all that to stay the same. Well, I was instrument flying, because I was probably a little scared to look outside the window. And he was saying, no, you can't do this. You can't just look at the instruments, which was interesting. He kind of taught me what those were. So I was really trying to make sure that we stayed level. But he kind of said, no, look out at that wing. You see there's a couple of inches between the wing and the horizon. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now look at the other wing. See how much distance there is there? And so I was like, oh yeah, well, that'll keep it level. And so I remember at 5 doing that. So forward, then he had all these old airplanes, and I would go fly with him, and he'd let me fly. And I can remember at 13, we went in an Aero Commander with a friend down to Pensacola they were picking up something, and he put me in the left seat on the way home. I mean, he's dead, so the FAA can't go after him now. But he puts me in the left seat, and he puts their son in the right seat. And our fathers sat in the back and just conversed, and we flew the Aero Commander, back from Pensacola at 13. So, we had all these. By the way, that was, I think the N number was 11 Lima. It was one of Eisenhower's infamous Air Force Ones. I don't know if you ever have seen that. So you asked about ratings. As soon as I was 16, my dad said, "I don't want to have anything to do with training you." We found a school that was close. I was a junior in high school, probably a sophomore at junior. And so I went and started taking lessons, and a really cool guy. And it was a nice, out of Greenville, Mississippi, KGLH. And got my private, I got all my time. I wasn't old enough, that took the test, aced the private. I was really excited about it, loved it. In the middle of playing football and doing schoolwork, I was driving 45 miles away to this school. And so as soon as I turned 17, I went back. I kind of took a break there, but so I could turn 17. When I came back, my old instructor had moved on, but I found another really nice instructor there. I got the 3 hours that I needed and did probably did a long cross country, and it knocked out my private. And Loved it. And then just started flying the Super Cub all over the country. And I kind of took a breath. I mean, I kept flying, but life got busy. And
As it does.
Yeah. Went to college. I got married out of college. We started having children. And I always tried to find a flying club or something that I could stay current. And so wherever I was in the country, and started out as an engineer and was designing stuff and having a great time. Started writing software kind of on the side, but always flew and always knew, it was one of those things that flying to me was such a passion. I probably prioritized, I couldn't afford to really fly, with the family, little family growing, but
sure.
it did something for me. It was always that if I could fly, every now and then it would just give me life. And so I hung on to it. And plus, and then, still it was a connection to my dad, who I loved, and we had a great relationship. And no matter where I was in the country, I could fly back home to the farm. The farm had an airstrip. It still does. We have a hangar there and a 3,000 foot turf stripped, 3,000 by 80 feet. Interestingly enough, now every August we do a big fly-in, and I don't care who listens to the podcast. Anybody that listens, they can come.
Come on down.
Usually first or second weekend in August, and we do a memorial to my dad, who knew all kinds of pilots. And we do a big cookout on Saturday and fly in, and we have tons of planes that come in there and have a good time.
That's really cool.
So, and what happened was, because I had so much like crop dusting and vintage aircraft experience, and I was a mechanical aerospace engineer, my brain would think a little bit like a test pilot. And so I ended up always having people want me to help them. Either home builds, or my dad was a member of EAA since 1965. And so he always took me to Oshkosh, and we went up all the time. So I grew up around, Experimental Aircraft Association and all the. So what happened was, I would end up doing a lot of ferry flights for people, or I would get in and they'd say, "Hey, I don't understand this. Could you?" And I would come in and sort of help do a little, maybe test flights, et cetera. So that kind of helped keep me in the air while I was, in my careers.
So after college, you talked about getting degrees in engineering, right? So what did your career path look like as you got out of college and you're starting your new family and kind of getting into the workforce?
Crazy stuff again. Like I've heard some of your other guests, my path was very unconventional. And I know even Fly the Transition, when I heard that, your podcast was named that, I was like, oh my gosh, I've had such transitions. I started out as a design engineer on these large mining dump trucks that haul like 200 or 300 tons of material. And so I did a lot of tests of those. I got to travel up in the British Columbia, and we'd go out to Tucson and these big, and we'd build ramps and strain the trucks and jump them. And it had so much fun, designing these trucks. I got to writing software, and I ended up working for a software company that wrote a water billing software. It was the first PC-based water billing software, and it went around the world. It went gangbusters.
Oh wow!
All these cities and water the municipalities and water districts started using this guy's billing software. So I was sort of a software developer, but also a sales engineer, and I traveled around and helped people implement this water software. And it kind of got me into software. I really liked it. I loved it. It was Windows had just come out. I started writing Windows applications, and some circumstances happened where I ended up becoming a plant engineer of a guy who wrote this patented process of doing some things. And while I was in that, a mentor from college of mine hired me to run a company that was making cutting and welding products. I know this sounds crazy. It's a machining. We did CNC. So I started programming CNC machines, and I was there only about a year, and I ended up getting promoted to the conglomerate that owned that company. They were based in St. Louis. And so that's how I got to St. Louis. It was kind of crazy. I was 29. I became a marketing manager of a huge company, which was just, and we were flying around. And again, it piqued my interest because they had a Saberliner at the time that I got to fly on the Saberliner. And then they ended up getting a Challenger 604. And so I got to fly on this Challenger. And that kind of introduced me to corporate aviation. I had not really been around corporate aviation very much. And I'm looking at this going, okay, these guys are living the life I want to live. You know,
Sure.
They're probably looking at me thinking, hey, here's a guy who's climbing the corporate ladder. And I was climbing it pretty quickly. And while I'm doing all this corporate stuff, I'm looking over going, gosh, I wish I was the guy flying it. I want to fly the Challenger. And those guys knew that I was a pilot, and they would invite me into the cockpit. And so it only fueled my fire. I went from that, they were a heavily leveraged corporation, and I could see writing on the wall that they were going to implode. And so I went off on my own and started writing software full time.
Okay.
Became the chief information officer of a medical products company because I wrote all their software, and they hired me. And again, I continue to fly corporate. I'm doing all this offshore manufacturing. I'm just having a good time. I love learning stuff. I was having a great time. And that company got purchased, and I was out in the cold. Well, I had written some software for a church.
Okay.
And this was brand new. It was sort of, no one was using the internet for mission critical software, but I had started writing web-based, cloud-based stuff, and no one had ever heard of this. And, they were thinking I'm crazy. I wrote a web-based, cloud-based software to check in kids into church ministries. And it used barcodes. It used all the manufacturing software that I had, my techniques that I've been using for years. And I know that's something that you've talked about with your other guests, and that, everything that I did, I continued to take all of those tools and I would move them to the next career, however nuanced it was. So I moved all my manufacturing software and built a ministry-based software that did way more than just check in children, but it kept kids safe. It used barcodes, and it used fingerprints, and I was using, iPods, believe it or not, before you and it would check a kid in, and when you came back to pick up your child from Sunday school or something, you would know that, that person can check in, can check out that child. Yeah. It's not someone trying to steal a kid. And that became a really big thing, is to have security for childcare. And I started selling that software around the country. But what ended up happening is, while I wrote the software, we got involved with the church, and I ended up becoming on staff, and I started running all the technology. And while my wife and I were there, we ended up writing. She's a therapist. She's a marriage counselor, and we ended up writing a curriculum for marriage, for couples, for people preparing for marriage. I ended up running. So it's really crazy, but relationally, we were sort of the ones who help people prepare for marriage, enrich your marriage, and then if your marriage failed, we ran a divorce care class for post-marriage. And I kept telling people, listen, it's okay to see in two of these. I don't want to see in all three. I don't want to have to
collect all
prepare
these classes.
So, but all that to say, and then we ended up traveling around the world to teach some of the tools, and at the same time, we began to drill water wells, because didn't tell you this, but when I was in college, I did a trip to Africa and flew with a missionary aviator. And while I was there, I helped drill water wells. And 30 years later, lo and behold, we're traveling across the globe, and we started drilling water wells to bring clean water to people in Africa. And so I've been to Africa and India more times than I want to count. And I've flown with a lot of the pilots in Zimbabwe and South Africa. And we have a ton of water wells, and we just made contacts all over the world. And that's where I began filming a lot of the stuff, to show people, no, we really are drilling water wells. So crazy all over the globe kind of stuff. Just crazy.
What is it like flying in some of those other countries? I think there's a lot of people who are just familiar with our way of flying in the United States, or say they're Canada, they're familiar with that system. But having been to other places in the world, what is that like to fly in with missionary flying?
It's not a lot different, than here. You have some nuances, but the truth is, what a lot of the Bush pilots would tell you, it's not nearly as organized, as here. I mean, we take for granted that someone's sort of watching out for us here in the U.S. and that, if you try really hard, you can screw up and run into a TFR or a restricted airspace or airspace that you shouldn't be in, to not talk to somebody in Delta or bust a Bravo. We don't want to do that, but it's pretty tough for us to do that because we have great charts and we have a very good communication. When you get on the other side of the globe, it's not like that. The charts are poor. So there are, and so most of my friends who fly over there, you have to be incredibly diligent, as far as prepping and knowing where you're going to go. And it's usually missionaries teaching missionaries, where they can go, what they can't do. And plus, charts are poor. The runways are notoriously poor, even if you're going into a big airport. I've flown the Falcon around. I was flying into, I started, we can get into it when I made a career change, but I remember once I was flying charter and I was flying somebody into St. Martin. Now, that's not in Africa. I mean, that's just in the Caribbean. Yep. We're on final approach, and he goes, Spirit Jet 102, cancel the clearance. We have a dog on the runway, make a 360, and so that kind of stuff, you want to know what's different is you're in Africa, you're typically buzzing the strip to see if there's a zebra or a warthog to make sure you don't have an elephant or a giraffe on the runway. So
we're just worried about deer here. So
yeah.
Deer and waterfowl in the vicinity of the airport. So
Exactly.
Interesting. That's really interesting. So you talked about working through this, building the software for ministry, and you're doing this ministry work. I happen to know the answer to this already, but that in turn leads to career number 2, doesn't it?
So we're raising kids. Kids are out of the house. They're getting married, and I end up becoming the guy who officiates all these weddings, and I'm doing all this stuff, and what really happened, and I didn't tell you this, Jim, but I did mention my dad died in 2017. And so when he died, it was a big deal to me. It kind of, believe it or not, I'm on the other side of the globe. I'm drilling water wells. My daughter graduates, and we try to do a trip with our kids when they graduated college just to kind of, connect with them. And so my daughter, my youngest child out of 4, graduates from Mizzou. And I say, hey, I'm going to be drilling water wells and training pastors in Sierra Leone and Liberia. These are really tough places. And then I'm going to travel over to Tanzania to fly with a buddy of mine who flies medical relief in a Navajo. There's a great organization here at the Spirit of St. Louis Airport called Wings of Hope. It's a sectarian. It's a nonprofit, humanitarian, and they build and help put the planes together for humanitarian efforts around the world. Well, this Polish priest who had become a missionary pilot, I met him while they were building his Navajo at Wings of Hope. We became great friends, and I flew him around the country, and then he flies this Navajo across the Atlantic and goes back to Arusha, Tanzania. And it's become this medical relief. It's an amazing, the cool plane's got a cool paid job, and he's over there doing just real work, It's regardless of your beliefs or whatever, they're just caring people. If you have a medical emergency, they got a twin engine. In Tanzania, you can't fly at night unless you have two engines. They don't do single engine night. It's against the law. Yeah. So he's over there flying, and I'm like, I want to fly with him while I'm there. And plus, I'll take my daughter around. She can go on a safari. We go into Serengeti, and it's just going to be this amazing thing. So this is 2017. I go over late summer, and I'm flying. He says, hey, can you put on these epaulets, and you can do whatever you want. You can walk wherever you want to go. But I need to pick up my Navajo from maintenance from Nairobi. I'm like, okay.
Like there's nothing.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So we fly up to Nairobi. I stay in one of the British Air Force lodges. So we fly this Navajo from Nairobi to Kilimanjaro. Okay. So, I mean, and I'm thinking that it doesn't get any better than this. This is amazing. This is what I was born to do. Highlight of my life, at this point. I land in Kilimanjaro. We fly it over to Arusha, and we go eat supper, dinner, and I go to bed. And at midnight, my wife calls me, and I'm like, uh-oh. And she says, I just need to tell you, your dad died. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And my dad had a heart attack. He was 78, great man. And and so I realized I'm coming home the following day. I can't get home any quicker. So we jump on an airliner. We jump on a 787. We go through Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. We stop in Dublin for fuel. We land in Washington Dulles. I get to Dulles. This is how aviation works. I have a 13-hour layover in Dulles because I didn't know this, but I was going to take my daughter to visit Washington, D.C. that day and then make it home to St. Louis. As soon as we get to Dulles, I have a friend land there who loves my dad. He's in a Mitsubishi MU2. He lands Dulles. I get off the plane. I walk into the car. They take me around the signature at Dulles. We crank up the MU2. He flies me to Greenville, Mississippi. He lands there. Two guys show up there, one in a 195 and one in a 182. And they grab me and they grab everybody with me. And we fly from Greenville to our farm and land on the strip. And then I end up taking a shower, going picking out a casket, and we bury my dad the next day. So all that to tell you, I went from the highest point of my life, flying a Navajo from Nairobi to Kilimanjaro, to coming home to face the death of my father. Now, all that not to be a downer, but here's what happened, and I actually am going to answer your question. Here's how the transition happened. In the aftermath of my dad's death, I'm sort of doing a little bit of soul searching. I'm saying, okay, here I am. I'm in my early 50s. I think I was 51 or 2. And I'm like, okay, what I want to do with the rest of my life. This is kind of eye-opening. It's sort of one of those huge moments in my life. I'm talking to my mom in a couple of months after his death, and we're kind of just debriefing, and Mom asked me how I'm doing and in my job, and I'm like, yeah, well, I'm kind of frustrated, this and that. And she says, oh, and I told her that I had just got I was doing some flying, and she made this one comment. She has no idea how this impacted me. She said, oh yeah, and I said, I'm thinking about whether I want to fly or not, And she said, well, your dad thought that you were probably going to go fly for a living, soon. I said, wait, what? She said, your dad had told me, he said he just kind of felt like you were probably going to go. You'd gotten your multi-commercial and all that, and he just thought you were probably getting ready to make a career change. And so I was like, really? I went on about it. No big deal. Kind of 6 months go by, and I could not quit thinking about, like, my dad's words were ringing in my ear almost.
Yeah.
And so long story short, I started mentoring up a guy to take over my duties. I told my wife, I said, hey, I kind of want to, the kids are all out of the house now. I kind of want to go do what I thought I was probably going to do 25 or 30 years ago, but I want to go fly. And she said, let's do it. And now I knew that I was probably, there was a shortage. Mm-hmm. And it was a great time, but I knew that I was probably going to take a pay cut. It was going to be tough. And so we started buckling down. We started trying to figure out the budget. And I will tell you, I've heard other guests of yours say it was all, a lot of networking. You hear that a lot. And I'm telling you, I can't underwrite that anymore. I had a lot of contacts. There was a guy that ran a charter company out of Spirit of St. Louis Airport, and he had asked me. We talked about flying all the time, and I had a Baron, Beechcraft Baron at the time, and I had flown. They had a dry lease, and if one of their planes was in maintenance at Battle Creek, Michigan, or Lincoln, Nebraska, or wherever, I would fly their pilots out to go pick up their aircraft.
Sure.
So these guys were watching me, and I didn't know it, but I had flown their chief pilot up to an airport, and he was in there, and he watched me fly the Baron, and so they were talking about it, and they were hurting for pilots, and so they approached me. This is what's crazy. I had been thinking of switching careers. They approached me and said, hey, we really need some pilots, and I'm like, are you interested? I said, absolutely. And so this was end of 2019, and they said, listen, we have, at first they had some citations, and then that went away, and they were talking about typing me in a Lear, and that kind of went away. But they said, listen, we have a bunch of Hawkers, and we need Hawker pilots really bad. Would you do it? I said, sure. The owner was a friend of mine, and he said, listen, let's just do it part-time. If you don't like it. I'm like, okay. He said, we're going to type you in May. This is late in 2019.
I was just going to say
He said, we have a slot.
I know where this is slot.
Exactly. So we have a slot in May. And I said, oh, it's great. He said, we'll type you, and then you can fly for us part-time whenever we need an extra Hawker pilot, and I'm like, that sounds awesome. And I'm thinking, and I had started, I kind of left out a little bit. I had a Baron that was flying a lot, and then I had a friend who had a King Air, and so I started flying the King Air and getting a lot of really good, higher altitude, experience. A buddy of mine had the MU2, and he was all Part 91. These were all Part 91s. But he really wanted to get his ATP, and I had not really thought of getting an ATP. I just thought, I wasn't on my radar. I mean, I knew I would probably end up needing it if I flew for an airline, but
yeah, sure.
Well, so he comes up, and we were sort of partners in crime. If I did it, he would finish it. You know what I'm saying? He always liked me to be involved. So this was the year before. This was in early 19. He goes, hey, I'll tell you what I'll do. This guy had means, and he said, if you'll do this with me, I'll pay for your ATP, CTP. And so we went to flight safety, and we did the ATP, CTP course, which you obviously have to have. And then following that, I went ahead and just pounded it and took my ATP written and got through with it. So I already had my written. I had not taken my practical, the check ride, but I had already passed my ATP. So here I am. It's Christmas, and he's saying we're gonna type you in the Hawker, and I'm so excited because I know that the Hawker, because it's a 135 operation, the only difference in an ATP check ride, there's no difference in a Part 135 charter check ride in a jet and an ATP. All they have to do is you have to say, I want an ATP, and your oral exam is a little different because they ask you ATP questions, but your check ride's the same. I mean,
Gotcha.
when you do a Part 135 type ride, you do everything that you would ever do in an ATP ride. So, of course, March 16th rolls around, and the world stops, and he comes to me a week later, and I wasn't prepared to do it. I mean, at that point, my life changed. I had to do a whole lot of online stuff, and he goes, "Hey, look, we're pressing pause. We don't know." What's interesting is that they were pressing pause and holding on all their hires, but their business went gangbusters during COVID.
Wow, really?
I mean, no one wanted to fly commercial. And
I suppose, yeah.
Anyone that had means were flying private, and I'm telling you, his business skyrocketed. His charter company skyrocketed. So here he is. He ends up hiring everyone that he froze on toward the latter of 2020. And they start coming back to me at the end of 2020, and by Christmas, which was a year later, but by end of 20, they were saying, "Hey, are you interested?" And I'm like, "Oh, sure, let's go again." Just like last year, I go in for an interview, and here I am because I'm older. I'm not the young guy with 1,200 hours.
Right.
I mean, I've got probably 2,500 or 3,000 hours at the time, and I've been flying King Airs, and I've got plenty of multi and night instrument, and so they're loving this. And they, long story short, they hire me the full time, and so I retired from the church. I moved over, and went and got a type ride in my ATP in the Hawker, and I started flying charter, which was eye-opening, man. I mean, because charter's just, you're, charter dog. I mean, and I ended up getting incredible. If I could say anything to anybody, it's a great way to get experience, especially in the jet world. I had some great guys there that it's a sort of a family operation. We had about 30 pilots and a bunch of Hawkers and a Lear, and I think we had probably one Challenger and one Gulfstream. So we had a big, outfit, but a ton of Hawkers at the time. And I got to fly all over North America and the Caribbean, and land at every big airport I never thought about landing at, and shot approaches and saw stuff and flew all hours of the night, and ice and storms. I mean, and I just learned a ton in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And I would tell anybody, go do that. Go pay your dues, fly for a charter company, that will train you well. And Part 135 is really cool because it's very regulated. And I always tell people, Part 121 is great. It's just that they don't do, the pilots in a 121 world, they get their paperwork and go in there and fly the airplane. They have dispatchers and everything's done for them. And not to, I'm not denigrating 121 guys, but Part 91 is not as regulated. Part 121 is maybe even more regulated, but the pilots don't do everything. 135, the pilots do everything. You are doing all the flight planning. Mm-hmm. You are flying the plane. You are handling the customers. You are making sure that that all the drinks and all the stock is perfect. And so it was a great sort of cut your teeth training ground for professional pilots.
You mentioned that the 135 world was an eye opener for. Is that kind of what you're talking about? That all these different and just the regulation and all the extras that you wouldn't expect with the 121 world.
Absolutely. I mean, I never thought about. I became an expert in making sure that the plane was stocked, and you kind of begin to, read the mind of your clients. You start to understand. Okay, this client is going to show early. That client's going to show late. you begin to know, when do I start the APU? I don't want to burn too much fuel, just stuff like that. But it just kind of making sure that people are happy, and because they're paying a lot of money to fly on this aircraft. And so you learn to be safe. And you have to be really, and I would say diplomatic is the best way to say. You become very diplomatic in how you say your yeses and nos, because as pilots, safety's the utmost. You have to say no to certain things, but you can say that with a smile on your face and end up making people feel real warm and fuzzy about what you're doing instead of just sort of being real curt. So
that brings me to a question that you kind of alluded to earlier, where we talked about how as you move from one job career to another, you're taking those skills you've learned elsewhere and applying them as you move along. So with that said, between your engineering and the software development and the ministry work, what things were transferable for you as you moved into aviation?
Gosh, everything. My thing, Jim, is that we're humans, and, and people that we serve are humans. So, I mean, we're all the same. And so if you can get outside yourself a little bit, and maybe you learn to do this in ministry, maybe a little bit more, or you should anyway, but you have to learn to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And so as a pilot, again, we're flying, we're trying to make sure people are safe, but those people, they're human, and they're coming on board with their baggage. Literally.
I was going to say,
and so I think, I built great relationships with all the people, especially owners of the aircraft that we flew, because, part of that is you're trying to be empathetic. You're trying to meet people where they are. And I would hope that most guys in ministry would do that, but I know this isn't a ministry podcast, but that's what I would do. People show up to the plane, I got a job to do, but I also need to make sure that person's okay and that they're getting what they need. And whether that be a specific water, it's kind of weird. I had the request that we had, take all the green M&Ms out of them, whatever. I'm making that up.
Yeah.
But, these people, some of the owners didn't, we had some people that had allergies, and you had to make sure that you had not had either a pet or nuts on board or, stuff like that. And so I think the ministry stuff translates because of that. The engineering stuff, that to me, that should be obvious. But, the mechanical and aerospace stuff and the software, these are complex machines. And it actually really helps to have an A&P or be able to think mechanically, because you're flying these things all over the place. And they're machines. And so you want to, things can go wrong, and they often do when you're flying a lot of charter. And just to be able to think quickly and to be able to problem solve and resolve things without, putting the mission, at jeopardy is a great thing. So I think, problem solving and then being a people person, I think it's really important. That should be a goal of every, especially charter guys. Staying cool and calm under crises. That's the name of the game, really.
So you mentioned that you started with the 135 World and the Hawker. Are you still doing that, or have you moved to other companies or aircraft? Or
no? So I did that for a couple of years, and had a really good friend. And again, this was all network. These are guys that I had flown with personally, but I had a really good buddy who was flying a Falcon, Dassault Falcon, in a Part 91 capacity. I flew an owner with a couple of other dry leases on it. And he had contacted me and just said, hey, man, his other co-captain, had a health issue, was losing his medical. And so he started having to hire contract pilots along the way. Well, so they got me SIC qualified in the Dassault Falcon, which, to me, was a dream. Here I'm flying the Hawker, the Hawker Siddeley, was designed in the 50s. And it is an amazing airplane. I would still tell anybody if they were transitioning and somebody said, hey, we're going to put you in a Hawker 750 or an 850 or a 900. It's an incredibly great aircraft. And it was a great design, but it's an old design. So there's a lot of buttons to push and knobs to turn. Okay. So here I am, I get SIC typed in a Dassault Falcon. And this thing's like space age compared to the Hawker. I mean, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Loved it. And I flew a bunch of contract trips with them. It was great. Made a little extra money because and I didn't tell you this, but I flew FO, and I really, because of the timing, we had some attrition. We had some guys that were hired by the airlines because of the pilot shortage. The airlines were sucking all the great pilots out of the charter world.
Okay. Yeah.
And so as those guys left, we were able to move off pretty quickly. And I got upgraded to captain pretty quickly within about a year and started flying. And again, that was a great learning experience because I'm doing all of every flight plan, every weight and balance, every trip, multiple legs, multiple trips, having just learned to figure out all that. Started flying contract on the Dassault Falcon, and then eventually they offered me a position as a captain on that Falcon, and so I took it. I miss the 135 world. It was a great company. I didn't tell you this, but I moved up to assistant chief pilot, and then started doing some work for as sort of an executive VP. And it was a great company, great company. I've pointed lots of pilots to that charter outfit at Spirit of St. Louis, and love those guys. And still, we meet up all the time. I talk to them all the time. But moved over to the Falcon, and that plane is unbelievable. So it's just been really fun to learn, and just to progress.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
what do you find to be the most rewarding part of what you're doing now?
Oh man, first of all, and the people that know me and love me, I had somebody say, hey, are you still enjoying it? They know me for years, and I'm like, yeah, I'm loving it. Yeah, I mean, I try to be very candid and honest with people. It's work, it's a job. There's always going to be something you don't like about your job. And so, but I would much rather be doing this than digging a ditch. Or, my brother's plowing a field, someday, and I'm flying over him at 41,000 feet saying, hey, I see the farm, So rewarding, I love, the truth is, it's a people thing. I do get to fly an amazing machine. I get to, I've been around the world. I've spent a week in Italy not long ago. I just got back from St. Thomas. I mean, we're unbelievable. Landed on Beef Island, Tortola, and the BVI. For short strip, that Falcon will land short. It's amazing. So seeing all this is amazing, incredibly rewarding to see all these places. But it's the people that I get to do it with, and we mentored a guy out of Vero Beach. He was a lineman. He is now. We gave him his first flights and kind of mentored him up. He's now a captain with NetJets. So he's flying all over the country, And here we go into last week. We fly into a little strip not many people go into on Beef Island in the British Virgin Islands. We land, we pull up, there's one other jet on the ramp. We pull up, it's this kid flying awesome. flying a NetJets Phenom 300, and we're like, what are you doing here, man? What so it is really still about the people, and you already know this, but the aviation community is amazing. We're for the most part, now pilots complain a lot and they want to work less and get paid more. Great. We have the best jobs in the world, and the community is one where we're for each other. I mean, all your guests they're stellar, and the aviation community is just that really unique world. It's sort of a secret. We all know most guys are just smart. They are typically for each other. And so that's the cool thing about what we get to do. So,
yeah. So if you had someone come to you asking for advice on how to switch careers into a career in aviation, what advice would you give them?
It's going to sound like a repeat from a lot of your other people. I would say this. Here's what I know. Fear keeps us from talking to other people because we're afraid to be rejected. That's why we don't reach out. But pilots, I love it when a guy approaches me. I love it. And we will bend over backwards to see that this person gets what they need. And what I would tell guys is reach out. If you don't know any, or if you do know people, start reaching out, build your network. If you don't know anybody, reach out to us. Reach out to me. Reach out to you, or drive to your local GA airport and just drive up. Guys love to be approached. Even the grumpiest guys on the field love being asked questions, and ask curious questions. Just ask questions of people. Hey, because most of the guys at my airport, believe me, I was sitting there eating lunch one day, and I'm looking over. There's an older gentleman next to me, and I say, what did you used to fly? This guy used to fly SR-71s.
Oh, come on. Let's talk about that.
and he was a Reno air racer in the biplane category. And I'm like, okay, that was just one guy. The two guys over, and these three guys all know each other because they're flying RV-8s together. And I just built an RV-8. So I'm talking to these guys. Well, the reason they know each other is one was the pilot, one was the Rio in an F4 in Nam together. Wow. And so, look, if you go to the airport, just be curious and start asking guys, hey, because most of them probably had a career in aviation or maybe. And if they don't, they love talking about it. And you get out. That's my advice. Just get out, talk to people, make connections, because those are the guys that gave me a shot. Don't be afraid to pay your dues. Things aren't going to happen on your timeline. Here's one of the sayings that I always say is that, it's probably going to take longer than you hoped, but it won't take nearly as long as you think it is. It's not going to be overnight, but you will be surprised at what happens. You'll look back and go, I can't believe I'm flying. You're going to be flying, and you're going to be surprised how quickly it happens. It just happens so quickly. And just be, network with people. Be curious, pay your dues, and believe it or not, good things happen, man. If you're willing to work, people are going to put you in positions that I still go, I can't believe they're letting me do this. Another maybe piece of advice is the world's really small. It's incredibly small. And, I'm not really one to believe in karma, but I will tell you the world's really small. And, my advice would be, especially in the aviation world, never burn a bridge, because you just never know. You're probably going to be working for that person, or they're going to be flying with you later.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I thought as we began that this was going to be a lot of fun, and it certainly was as advertised. So I really appreciate your time. This has been a lot of fun to hear your story, and I hope that this resonates with others out there as well.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'm going to blame Gordon Beachy, I know, to give you my name, but this has been great, and I appreciate what you do, and what you're doing is furthering aviation. And honestly, when I was trying to transition, and I just didn't know how to do that, and it all fell together for me, I know you're giving a lot of hope to a lot of us guys out there who are in a career, and we're trying to figure out, should I do it? And I'd say, yes, do it. You'll never regret it. So thank you, Jim, for doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you once again, Andy, for joining me on this episode of the Fly the Transition podcast. I really enjoyed hearing his story about how he continued to stay involved in aviation through all these years, even though it wasn't necessarily his career. But he was able to take that passion and some timely opportunities from networking and turn that into a career for himself that he's really enjoying and loves sharing it with others. So great story, Andy. I really appreciate you sharing that, and I hope that that can inspire others as they consider their journey into a career in aviation. Before I go, if you are enjoying what I'm doing here on Fly the Transition, if you haven't done so already, it would be wonderful if you went on to wherever you're listening to this podcast, left me a 5-star rating, a kind review. I'll read those reviews on a future episode. And make sure that you subscribe and share the podcast with your friends or anyone who you think might benefit from these inspiring stories of aviation career transformation. Also, if you think that your story or that of someone you know would be inspirational or beneficial for others to hear on Fly the Transition, feel free to leave me an email at flythetransition@gmail.com or any of my social medias, and let's connect and get them or you on the show for a future episode. Thank you all so much for joining me on this episode of Fly the Transition. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode, but until then, keep your eyes on the sky and your dreams soaring high.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.